Congressman and Texas Attorney General candidate for the Republican primary runoff, Chip Roy. Thank you so much, and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Yeah, great to be in Dallas, Jack. As you know, my wife grew up in Plano. My kids were born in Plano and Frisco, and I was a prosecutor living up in McKinney, so it's great to be here.
Good to see you. So on March 3rd, you came in second. You're obviously in the runoff against Mays Middleton. How are you going to turn around and win outright this time, which you have to?
Well, we're crisscrossing the state while I also burn both ends of the candle as a sitting congressman in a two-seat majority, so I have to spend a lot of time in D.C. But we're getting out and engaging with folks across the state, and the reception has been fantastic. Now that it's down to a two-person race, it brings clarity for people to see the distinction. And, you know, we worked very hard through March, but my opponent spent a whole lot of money, and frankly, I'd be pretty disappointed if I were him that I spent almost $18 million between him and a few friends, and only got to 39 points. So we're in a pretty good spot given the spend, and we've been out raising money, and we're ready to go between now and May 26th. And the message has been very clear. You can choose someone who has been in a courtroom, who's been a prosecutor, who's practiced law, who's been the first assistant attorney general, or you can try to hire somebody for on-the-job training who's never actually practiced law and has never done the job.
I was going to ask you, what do you think this race is going to come down to for Republican primary voters?
Well, I think when people see this, they're going to see a very clear distinction, and in terms of experience, that's the biggest difference. My opponent has never seen a day in court. He has never really truly practiced law. He has a law degree, but he's never really used it. For the most part, he's managed his family business, which means really administering royalties that he inherited from his family. And that's not somebody that is prepared to be the Attorney General of the state of Texas. We have enormously important issues. It is an enormous law firm, the biggest law firm in the state. I know it well. Having served as the first Assistant Attorney General, I know how it operates. I know what to do on day one because I've done it. And importantly, I've been in the thick of engagement in court as a federal prosecutor right here when I was in Plano and Sherman prosecuting criminals. When I was, as I said, the first Assistant Attorney General. And I've been a lawyer for Governor Perry, I've been a lawyer on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and have a deep understanding of all of the issues that affect the people of Texas. People are going to see that very clearly. They're going to see that they can choose someone with no experience who's trying to buy the election, or someone who's been earning it and has the experience necessary on day one.
Texans and Republicans seem to really want to have a fighter. And I'm wondering because, you know, you say you're a fighter, Mays Middleton says he's a fighter. How are people going to really know who the fighter is?
Well, I think, my opponent is trying to buy the brand MAGA. Some of us have been out there earning that brand and earning the stripes of someone who's been in court. And I think if you want someone that you can count on, then you need to look at what they've done. You know, I've been in the trenches. I'm currently the lead author of the Save America Act, the #1 priority for the president. We've passed that out of the House 3 times. We're putting pressure on the Senate to try to move it. I've led on numerous issues over the years. I was the co-author of the SUE Act, which moved with the Lake and Riley Act about a year and a half ago, which will give Texas and every other state the ability to sue the federal government in the event that it fails to secure our border in the future. An enormously important bill with major consequences. That takes leadership, looking down the field. I was able to deliver on the big, beautiful bill. Not just tax cuts, not just spending restraint, not just reforms to Medicaid, but I fought almost single-handedly, along with a handful of other folks, 3 or 4 of us, we fought to deliver on the repeal of the Green New Scam subsidies. Now, why does that matter? Because a very leftist PAC out of California ran $1 million of ads against me. They ran those ads against me in the Republican primary, never mentioning the Green New Scam subsidies, but rather focusing on Chip Roy is not MAGA enough. Chip Roy is a rhino. Why were they doing that? Because they fear me as Attorney General. They do not fear Mays Middleton. I've been in the trenches fighting. People across the country know that, particularly those on the left. And so there's a lot of folks who would like to see me not be Attorney General because they're afraid of what I would do to advance a conservative agenda for the people of Texas.
I want to run by you some of the things that no doubt you've heard Mays Middleton say about you.
Sure.
Okay. He accuses you of saying President Trump needed to be impeached, President Trump needed to be impeached. He said that you said Liz Cheney needed to be commended, not condemned. He says you spent a career fighting against the MAGA agenda, and you sided with the radical transgender lobby and Gavin Newsom to allow those surgeries on children, and that you fought to certify a stolen election in 2020. I know that's a lot, but I want to give you the opportunity to push back and respond to what he said.
Yeah, sure. This is what happens when you've inherited tens of millions of dollars that you can just dump into false ads that are lying about a candidate so that you can try to ladder climb your way to be the governor of the state of Texas with no real intention of focusing on being the attorney general, because you've never actually been a lawyer. Each one of those claims is either an outright lie or intentionally misleading. Let's go through them. If you look at the issue with respect to impeachment, I fought both impeachments of President Trump vigorously, voted against both impeachments of President Trump. On the issue of Liz Cheney, we were working through at the time the votes of what was necessary with respect to the conference chair. We didn't have the votes to remove Liz Cheney. I worked with the speaker. We figured out what the best path was. How do we unite? So we basically made an arrangement. Let's all unite. We'll support Liz right now in order to try to move the conference forward. But if she looks backwards and attacks the president, then we'll unite to call for her to step down. 2 weeks later, she was, criticizing the president. I was the first to step out, go to the steps of the House, and say Liz had to go. The speaker followed, and then it took about a month and a half to still build the coalition to change the conference chair. That's what you have to do when you're actually in the arena. The view is pretty good from the cheap seats if you're Mays Middleton, when you're hanging out here trying to take pot shots for those of us who have to be in there in the cauldron. And on all of the other issues, the fact is what he's trying to do is distort the reality. Let's take the transgender issue. As Attorney General, my job is to defend the people of Texas. As a member of Congress, I'm supposed to advance good policy. We're all united in wanting to end these absurd and abhorrent procedures on children and this transgender procedures that are destroying children's lives. I'm supported by, endorsed by Chloe Cole, one of the lead advocates for stopping these procedures. I held one of the biggest and most important hearings in the Judiciary Committee on this issue. I've supported legislation, but I had a disagreement on how we handled the legislation in December to try to move it through the Senate and focus it on a spending bill so we could move it that way rather than the approach that was taken. So I tried to amend it along with dozens of my colleagues. And so now my opponent is saying, you're settling up to the transgender lobby, because that sounds good when you can spend tens of millions of dollars of inherited money to attack, but it is not at all based in reality or truth. We're trying to advance an agenda and deliver something that my opponent has never really had to do in any significant way.
And just on the certification of the 2020 election, he still calls that a stolen election.
Well, I've been very clear about, at the time, in November of 2020, how much fraud there was in the election, that there was demonstrable fraud and that we needed to prove it, and worked very hard as, frankly, leaked text showed in my engagement with then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. We were trying to get the information, the evidence, and my goal was to say, look, if a state can demonstrate that, let's then have a different slate of electors, right? Let's show that the election hung in the balance and that a state would send us a different slate of electors. We never got there by January 6th, and so my view was we had to vote for the electors that were in front of us. I think that's what the Constitution said, and I was very clear about that, open about that, and I stated it publicly. But I was very clear throughout that whole process that you needed to seek truth wherever it may lead. And in fact, I was targeted by the Arctic frost, targeting of our records, and it had my records targeted by the Biden Department of Justice. So this
They
is again
wanted your emails.
What's that? Yeah, they were going after our data. So, and I didn't learn about that for 2 years, by the way. It wasn't until this last year, 2.5 years after they did it, before I even knew that they had violated my rights and looked at our information. So. This is another example of my opponent trying to turn something into something it's not. I've been very clear and very open, and that's not something my opponent has either had to do or chooses to do.
When President Trump visited Texas on February 27th, he gave you a shout out.
He did.
And I'm wondering, have you asked him to endorse you?
Well, I don't talk about private conversations with the president. The president and I get along great. We work together. He doesn't play in every state race. He hasn't gotten in the Senate race yet. He hasn't gotten in a number of issues or races. So We have a lot of great conversations. Right now we're focused on trying to get the Save America Act done. We're trying to figure out the DHS funding. We talk, his team and I talk regularly, but I appreciated the shout out. He said, Chip, you're doing a great job. Frankly, we're trying to deliver for the people and work with the president to do it.
You brought up the Save America Act, and I'm just wondering, in Texas, if that does pass, and I know there's a high hurdle for that to pass in Congress right now, especially obviously the Senate, because the House passed it. But I'm wondering, if it does pass, what impact would it have here in Texas? Because a lot of what's in that bill is already in place in Texas, right?
Well, there's 2 or 3 important components to it. And the biggest of which is making sure we've got the available data so that we can check voter rolls to ensure that only American citizens are voting.
Doesn't Texas already have that?
Well, right now there are federal barriers to getting the full check of our voter rolls against the federal system. So Arizona, for example, right now operates 2 different systems, one for their state laws, one for federal, meaning for state elections, and one for federal. Because under a federal judge's interpretation, under I guess it was the MVRA from the mid-90s, they're not allowed to run that check on the voter rolls, at least not the way we would like to see them done. So that's one of the important changes that would make a big difference, even in Texas. Obviously, it would have a bigger impact on states that haven't adopted the laws that Texas has adopted, and it's important for the entire nation and for Texas that the whole nation operate under at least one set of rules with respect to ensuring that only citizens vote, that we have voter ID so that we know that the right person is voting, and that these voter rolls are checked. It's a fairly common sense issue, by the way, polling way off the charts. The entirety of the bill polls north of 70% among Republicans, Democrats, black, white, Hispanic, male, female. It polls very favorably across the board.
My last question on that topic is just about, if it does pass, how easy will it be for people to offer proof of citizenship? Because I'm thinking about married women, that kind of thing. Is this going to be onerous on people?
So we designed it very intentionally to be the largest burden be on the state and to provide an easy path for citizens, but one that holds you accountable. So the way we drafted it is, one, if you're already registered and there's nothing changes, you're good to go. You're still voting. If you have a life-changing event, you move, you get married, something else happens, then you need to go re-register. You have to do that anyway, by the way, right? Typically, you got to go re-register, change your address or whatever. So you go re-register, and when you go, now you have to demonstrate your citizenship at that time. And if you have any kind of issue, let's say you're a married woman whose name had changed, and that's a very small subset of the population that would be in that window, right? Who hasn't already taken care of that. I ran this by my wife and a whole lot of my female family members. But if that happens, and let's say you're Sarah Smith on your birth certificate and you're Sarah Jones on your driver's license, all you have to do is sign an affidavit, literally one signature, one line, and say, I'm the same person, under penalty of perjury. That's it. That's literally it. That's literally in the text of the bill. That's getting pushed around without a lot of knowledge. It's just saying, oh, it's going to impede people's ability to register. No, it's not. Literally, that's all you have to do.
Okay, thank you for that. So let me ask you about another issue here in Texas, and that is about the Texas the school choice program, education freedom accounts. And there has been a legal battle in place. A judge, though, said that Islamic schools have to be able to take part in them, and if people want to go to these Islamic private schools, they should be able to, like every other religious entity. Where are you on that issue?
Well, I think the governor did the right thing in addressing this concern that a lot of Texans have, and here's why. At its core, Islam is a political ideology. And so when you've got things being taught in schools that are counter to our rule of law, that undermine Western civilization, and that frankly are against our interests as Texas and America, again, not like a freedom of speech issue that you have the right to say something, but you're now taking taxpayer dollars to advance something, to say that you're going to advance Sharia law, for example, that is inconsistent with Texas law, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, then the governor is right to say that Texas taxpayer dollars shouldn't be going to fund that. So that's obviously the debate. The courts are now going to go look through that and go back and forth on balancing the interest of the First Amendment ability for religious expression and how you're going to handle taxpayer dollars going to these schools. I think the governor is right to draw that bright line. As Attorney General, I would draw that bright line. I would fight alongside the governor to ensure that we were trying to defend taxpayers funding only schools that are going to support, embrace, and fully follow Texas laws.
But how are you able to really, if the school says we're not doing that, how do you prove that they aren't, or prove that they are? You know what I mean?
Like anything else, you have to go prove, gather evidence, get examples of what's being taught, find the examples where Sharia law is being taught or where there's evidence. For example, we've got loads of evidence of certainly imams of various entities throughout the state of Texas that may or may not be affiliated with any certain schools. That's for the investigators to go demonstrate and prove. But we've got examples of imams who've been very outright and outspoken in saying that effectively they're following the Muslim Brotherhood memorandum to wage jihad against the West, that Texas is the target and the epicenter of that fight, and that they're actually called to advance Islam through the state of Texas and to Islamify Texas in effectively jihad. So when you see that, and you see that kind of evidence, then that is, in my view, contrary to our laws, contrary to Western civilization, contrary to the Declaration, the U.S. Constitution, Texas laws and Constitution, and the governor is right to say, nope, we're not going to fund that.
And so, but if the schools are not doing that, and if schools are just private schools, they're teaching religion, et cetera, you're okay with them being part of the program?
These are all fact questions, right? You have to go look at and see, but any taxpayer funds need to go to entities that are going to be consistent with Texas law. So, any school that is consistent with Texas law, then certainly would be able to get funds according to our laws. But you can't be advocating to undermine our laws and get Texas taxpayer dollars.
Last question, and that is, if you are elected, what are your top priorities?
Well, this is a great question, one that I get all the time. Why are you running for Attorney General instead of staying in Congress? Well, first of all, my son is 16, my daughter's 15. My wife's been carrying the load while I've been traveling back and forth for 4 terms, and I need to be home with my family. But second of all, and importantly from a professional standpoint in public service, is I believe we're at a crossroads for the state of Texas. This state has been changing. It has a significant amount of influences coming in and against it. I say often it's being attacked by a lot of leftist and Marxist groups that are funding organizations that are undermining our safety and security, whether it's George Soros, whether it's Arabella and the Wren Collective funding DAs and judges, putting criminals on our streets. We see the attack that I've already described with respect to the Islamification of Texas. These are, again, well-funded groups, upwards of 500 or 600 of them, according to various entities that I've been looking into and researching, that are funded very purposely to advance Islam through the state of Texas, which I believe undermines, as I've already articulated, our rule of law and undermines our Western civilization and values. The border remains a major issue, notwithstanding the fact that Border Patrol under President Trump and under this administration and Tom Homan's leadership and others has secured the border and stopped the flow for the most part. That's not permanent. And we haven't made permanent changes to the laws to try to stop a future administration from leaving our borders wide open. You're going to need an attorney general that will fight that issue. And then there's another issue that I talk about that people are always a little bit surprised about as a Republican, but what I call the corporatification of Texas and the heavy influence of major corporations buying up hospitals, making it where there's less competition, which drives up prices and provides fewer options for Texans. Texans have, I think, an inherent ability or right to be able to get health care. Not a right in the sense that my leftist friends mean that government provides you that health care. You ought to be able to go to the doctor of your choice. And right now that's being constrained by monopolistic powers and forces. And then you've got this massive buy-up of Texas lands, ranches, farms, meatpacking facilities, buying up our businesses. I'm all for the free flow of capital, but we've got a lot of entities that are, boardrooms in New York or boardrooms in Chicago or LA or London that are making a lot of decisions for how we operate in Texas. And I think you need an AG that's looking at all of that. The Attorney General has a lot of power to go look at the books, for example, of nonprofits, of NGOs, in particular, to see how dollars are flowing. And I think we have a responsibility to make sure that Texans own Texas. So these are some of the priorities. There are others. We got to restore the blocking and tackling of the Office of Attorney General. Open records is a really important one. I don't think we're doing enough on that front. I think we need to be quicker when you get these open records requests. I think that's important for people of all walks of life and ideologies. You need to know what your local government's doing. You need to be able to get that information. There's occasionally some laws that, put limits on that, but we ought to be quick at getting that out. It's really important for transparent government. Child support needs to be, I think, spruced up to make sure folks are getting timely child support, and that it's fair for moms, dads, and kids. And I think we have a lot to do to improve that. Those are the core functions of the 4,100 people who work at the Office of Attorney General that I've worked with before, and the Law Enforcement Division as well. So a lot, I just said a lot, but we got a lot to do.
Congressman and Republican candidate for Texas Attorney General Chip Roy, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate
Yep.
it. Thank you.